farmers were being pitted against one another by buyers. Yeah, we want peaches, but the farmer down the road is going to sell us peaches for cheaper. Will you lower your price for cheap peaches? So you have all these farmers competing with one another. By forming a cooperative, they decide, okay, we are going to sell our peaches together for one price. And so the Capper-Volstead Act allows them to do that, but they're selling it through the cooperative. They're not selling it individually. They're selling it through the cooperative. And it's a really, really important statute. Cooperatives in agriculture have been extremely valuable to farmers. Otherwise, we would have just big corporations, and they would have lost a lot of power and a lot of financial gain. What our nonprofit does, the California Center for Cooperative Development, is that we help groups to start cooperatives. We also help with established cooperatives, help them to have training in governance and so forth to help them to operate more smoothly.
It's time for conversations about our food and how it's grown on Farm to Table Talk with your host, Rodger Wasson.
Cooperation. I love that word. And cooperation seems like it's one of the first words we ever hear. I think when you're going into the first grade, there's a teacher saying, now kids, we have to cooperate here. And we end up spending our whole life talking about cooperation. And I'm fortunate today to have somebody help me, Kim Coontz. I'm going to talk to you about cooperation, Kim, which is not new to you because you're the executive director of the California Center for Cooperative Development. And that's a mouthful. But where I want to start, though, is the kind of your version of cooperation. A lot of people have heard about cooperatives, and cooperatives fit in an area that I work in all the time, the food chain, and whether it's, retail stores and farmers and hubs and so forth, but consumers come across it in lots of different ways. But I think that if we went around and said, okay, so what is a cooperative exactly? I'm not sure what kind of answers we get. So when you tell people you're involved in cooperative and you have to explain what's a cooperative, how do you do that?
Well, the first thing I do is, cooperation is something that we all do, and cooperation is at the core of a cooperative. But a cooperative, when we're talking about it, is a business entity that is organized according to principles that were established by the International Alliance for Cooperatives, ICA, International Cooperative Alliance. And the fundamentals are that it's a business that is open to all people that can use the services of the cooperative, that it is operates democratically on the basis of one member, one vote, and that the economic participation, the economic contribution in the cooperative, that's probably the biggest difference between a cooperative and a stock business that we're most familiar with in the United States, in that your sharing of profits from the business in a cooperative are not based on your economic contribution. They're based on your use of the cooperative. And that's why we call the sharing of economic contributions, profits in the cooperative patronage, because it's based on your use of the cooperative.
Wow. Well, you said several things I want to catch up on. One of them, you started with an international entity, and I didn't know there was an international. I just assumed this was like an American law that created cooperatives. But there's a broader definition than that applied internationally.
Well, certainly as business enterprises, we do have laws in the United States that are specifically for cooperatives, but there is an international entity called the International Cooperative Alliance that's made up of cooperative representatives from all over the world, and they share information and have established what are now 7 cooperative principles.
I saw somewhere a cooperative is a group of people that have come to the conclusion they need to do something together, that that there is a need and it's not something that they can tackle all by themselves. And so, and then they might look at becoming a cooperative. That's probably overly simplified, but it seemed like at least starting with people recognizing that they're into dealing with something, what procurement or marketing or housing or something like that, that it's more than one person can do by themselves. Is that fair?
That's exactly it. And I think this is what attracts me to cooperatives because it's a self-help model. It's a model that allows people who have challenges in the marketplace to say, gosh, I share the same challenge with other people, whether it's agricultural marketing, housing, childcare, natural foods, all these different entities. I share something in common with other people. And if we join together, then we can meet this challenge by developing an enterprise that meets our common needs.
There's a lot of attention now on the childcare front too, of people that have to be able to deal with childcare. It's very expensive, and so I assume that young families with children, and they may not have other options, can they just say, "Let us create our own preschool or something like that, and get together and then use a cooperative structure to get that off and running."
They can either decide to start one or they can join one because there are in California, we have over 200 childcare cooperatives. And so you can look to see if there's already one that's established where you live. And sometimes I think we don't realize that cooperatives are as prevalent as they are in these different sectors. And so, the first thing is to know that they exist and check to see if there's already one you can join.
So in that particular case, they've got a need, and then they may go together, maybe have to pool some resources, but hopefully it's going to be less expensive and meet some other needs that they have. Maybe hire somebody that's doing the coordination or a teacher or so forth and get it up and running. What are the categories? All the way from, we've mentioned briefly farming and agriculture, and then all the way back to, preschool too. But what are some of the major categories where cooperatives often fit?
Well, besides agriculture and childcare, like we just said, I think the largest cooperative enterprise throughout the United States are credit unions. We don't realize that they are actually consumer cooperatives. So when you're a member of a credit union, you are actually a co-owner technically so credit union membership is the largest membership of cooperatives in the United States. There's housing. There are housing cooperatives. That's another sector. In California, we have about 175 housing cooperatives. There are consumer food cooperatives that mostly focus on natural foods. And currently there are about 12, so there are not as many of those in California. Worker cooperatives is a growing area in the cooperative sector. This is where the people that own the business are the people who work there. And currently there are about 50 in California.
Now, how does that differ from employee-owned businesses? I mean, there's some companies I've known of that wanted to turn the ownership over to employees, and so the employee ownership was through a corporate structure, not necessarily a cooperative structure.
Well, there are different ways that methods of employee ownership. So one of them, the most common, is an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan, and we have laws that support that. And for very large companies, there are actually incentives for doing that. Those same incentives don't really work for smaller companies. And an ESOP is not strictly a co-op because usually it's not one member, one vote. They usually have a piece of the pie and so forth. It's certainly a good thing for employees to own stock in the corporation, have a stake in it, but it's not necessarily the same. A worker cooperative would be 100% owned and controlled by the people that work there.
And then they're going to make a decision, like who's a chairman of the board and so forth, and then they're going to hire maybe a staff person to be CEO and so forth.
Right. And they're going to decide what their pay is. They will share the profits according to either their hours worked or their wages earned. And, the advantage, of course, is that when you have a worker cooperative, 100% of the, of any profits go to the workers, and workers are deciding how their workplace, what are their workplace policies. All of those kinds of things are decided by the workers.
You remind me that when I was a kid, I worked for a co-op, helping them deliver feed. And it was had a cooperative board, and the board of directors of the cooperative at the grain elevator were farmers in the area, and we farmed in the area, but I could work, part-time for them, and I would go out and deliver feed to farmers that were in the co-op, and they were able to get, high quality feed products, and it wasn't as expensive as some of the other alternatives. So that was really their incentive too. But lately, and I know in agriculture, there's things like food hubs where we're starting to get back to having small farms, and they need to be able to put food together, or processing plants where there's just large packing plants, but the small farms don't have any way to get their products processed and distributed into the marketplace. So they're coming together as well. So it seems like it's a broad horizon. I don't know, how do you choose where you work? Because there are so many needs across the country of people that are recognizing that, it'd be beneficial if we could work together, if we could, quote, cooperate. And yet, I'm sure many of them don't know the first thing to do, other than the fact they recognize a need. So how do you jump in there? Say if I was going to want to form a cooperative right now, and I say, well, here's something I need to do. I want to get together with somebody else, and we've got the same interest. Are we going to have to hire a lawyer? Are we going to have to put a certain amount of money on the table to be able to get things going? How does that happen?
Yes, it depends on what your goal is, but it's just like any other business, that there are the same kinds of expenses that you need to pay: startup expenses, operating expenses, and so forth. So what our nonprofit does, the California Center for Cooperative Development, is that we help groups to start cooperatives. We also help with established cooperatives, help them to have training in governance and so forth, to help them to operate more smoothly. We're not the only center for cooperatives. There are centers, nonprofit centers all across the United States that provide this service. We are independent nonprofits, so we don't get government funding to support our work. So we have to have our work compensated in some ways. Sometimes that's through grants. Sometimes we have funding through our certain donations that we've gotten, and sometimes we ask for a fee for service. We offer our services on a fee for service basis.
So if you looked out across the horizon and you were identifying opportunities where you could say, here are this group of people or this segment of an industry that would make sense for them to be able to structure themselves as a cooperative, to be able to deal with a marketing need, or maybe a procurement need, or some sort of services that it's not being addressed individually, or maybe there's a large corporation that is dominating whatever area that they're involved with. So if you see a need, but do you scout for those things? Are you able to look out across the horizon and say, this is an area we should go talk to these folks because they're missing an opportunity?
Well, we provide education and outreach, and one area is housing. We have a cooperative housing, in which probably that sector needs more assistance and more education, because I don't really think it's a more difficult area for people to just kind of independently say, we have this need and we need to fill it and so forth. So that's an area that I would like to see more growth in, since we have a crisis in California. We have a crisis all over the United States in that people are not able to own a home. And this home ownership, if we look at studies, home ownership is correlated with all kinds of positive things for families, for children. And so I think it becomes not only the issue for the people who want to start a co-op, but it's a community issue. we want to have opportunities. We want to make sure that everyone in our state, for instance, in California, don't we want that opportunity for people to be able to own their home? Most people would like to have that opportunity for not only for themselves, but for their kids, for people that they know. And so in those cases, it's important that we not only educate the consumers about that, but also our government officials to say, is there some way we can support this? We are right now funding a lot of building of new units, encouraging a lot of new housing development. Can we look and see if there's a way that we can strategize so that those new buildings are going to be open to people that are currently locked out of the homeownership market?
Well, at that stage, does that mean you envision from the outset that a project might be organized as a cooperative? So if they're going to, and in fact, there's talk about getting more investments in different areas to be able to start housing and so forth.
Yes. I mean, one of the challenges in a cooperative is that outside, our usual model is that outside investors have an economic interest, and that's why they invest. In this way, we have some social areas where you don't really want an economic investment in there. Our government invests in different things too. So can we ask our government to team with people to promote these kinds of limited equity housing cooperatives, for example, and encourage the development of those in order to open this opportunity of home ownership to more people in the state, especially those that are currently locked out? Because a cooperative is especially if we're talking about the housing arena, if you had the choice between owning a share in a cooperative for housing and an independent home, most people would probably choose an independent home because you have more freedom and so forth. But if people are choosing between being stuck in a rental market where you have no security and this kind of intermediary ownership of cooperative ownership, people would probably choose the cooperative ownership. So,
how does that differ from a condominium?
In a condominium, people are owning their individual unit, and they belong to an association that controls the commonly owned areas. Condominiums are a great alternative. They can be more inexpensive, but condominiums also many times end up being investment opportunities for people, and they become rentals over time. A cooperative is set up. Everyone all members of the cooperative cooperatively own the entire development. You don't actually own your individual unit in the cooperative. You have an occupancy right to that unit. Also, because it's a cooperative, usually in the limited equity model and many even market rate cooperatives, they limit renting so that is an ownership option all the time. And, that's what we really want, is to secure opportunities for people. This is a service for you. You get to have a home, but the reason that you're investing in it isn't in order to gain equity so that you can rent it, so that you can make money off of it. That's fine for some people, but that's not the purpose of the cooperative. It's to offer housing. So we are a part of a network of nonprofits statewide that help residents to purchase their manufactured home park. And manufactured homes, the predominant model is that a person owns their manufactured home, but they lease the land underneath it, and someone else owns the park. What we're finding all across the United States is intense investment in these manufactured home parks. And it's really resulting in displacement. It's resulting in people losing their homes. Some parks are being converted to other uses. And so we are part of this Rock USA network statewide to help residents to purchase their parks so they gain security in the land underneath their manufactured home so that they can stabilize the price, make sure it doesn't get sold for profit, that kind of thing.
So that gets back to your point of solving one of the big problems we face is the housing shortage, is to be able to address that issue. Well, in any of these different areas, so you've got a group of people that would benefit from working together, whether it's, again, housing, childcare, labor, agriculture, and so forth. So at some point, it comes to their attention. Somebody sees it, or you or somebody goes in and say, you ought to think about that. And they get around a kitchen table and say, okay, what are we going to do next? What do they do next? I mean, if the need is identified, but all they've got is a group of individuals that say, gee, it'd be benefit if we could address this, and if we could address it collectively. Now, what do we do? What do they do?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to start a cooperative is in that way. A group of people identify, they start, they would develop a steering committee, which would be the people that are going to start a cooperative. They can educate themselves. You know, we have resources on our website. There are lots of resources. Certainly at some point they would need to get the services of an attorney or provide to technical assistance providers, which is what we provide, because in California, especially for all different kinds of cooperatives, we have statutes that help cooperatives to help guide them so that they they incorporate using statutes that are developed for cooperative businesses. And that's what we mostly recommend.
Well, but it helps guide them, but they still, if it's a statute, they probably have to hire a lawyer. So somewhere in those early meetings, they must at least pitch in enough money to be able to employ somebody that knows the statutes and can help structuring it. And then if you decide, okay, here's what we can do, and here is the system that we can use. And is there some benefit to a cooperative, legally set up as a cooperative, versus in some case an association or an S corp, or there's all kinds of other structures? What's the biggest differential that has cooperative on the one to choose rather than all these different other forms for a business?
What you want to always do, and this is what we recommend, even when people come to us and say we want to start a cooperative, is to discern that a cooperative is the best way to organize. You know, you don't want to organize a cooperative because you like cooperatives. You want to organize it because it's the best way to move forward to meet your needs. After that is done, a cooperative has a few different advantages, and using that corporate statute, I think is particularly good because in a cooperative, you have some tax advantages. You avoid double taxation. That would be the case in a standard corporation, in that you pay the corporation pays taxes on the income that the cooperative that the business has, and then when the shareholder gets their profit on their share, they pay taxes again, right? So basically, that's a double taxation. In a cooperative, what happens is the corporation passes through instead of okay, let's think of the member as a stockholder. Instead of paying taxes at your corporate level and at the distribution level of members, the members pay for taxes on their patronage. So it ends up saving the members of the cooperative, or the co-owners of the cooperative. So they benefit because the operating costs of the corporation are reduced, even though the taxes are passed through at the shareholder level.
So they determine that it's the right way forward. They understand the benefits that they could get from that. And then if you've got the legal structure set up to cooperate, then you may have to build a building or something. There's I would think that money has to be found, that either the starting members have to kick in a certain amount, and maybe can they seek grant money, other dollars that help them in that initially getting it started?
Okay, so this depends on what kind of entity that you're starting. If you're starting something that's for a social good like childcare or housing, you might be able to get some grant funding. You're not going to get it all paid for by someone else. But you can get a loan, and the loan would be to the corporation. The Small Business Administration, SBA, the federal government has said you need to serve cooperatives. So those kinds of services should also be available to cooperatives. And so one of the issues in a cooperative is that you do not want to have one member take on the liability for a loan, right? You want the corporation to do that. So that's one challenge sometimes with SBA that we're trying to work out, because you want everyone to be equal in a cooperative, right? That includes the liability and so forth. So when a loan is taken on, the goal is that it is a loan to the corporation.
In the case of agriculture, I think it's the Capper-Volstead Act that exempts them from certain enforcement actions of the Sherman Antitrust Act, which corporations get in a lot of trouble. It's also called collusion, when they start deciding they're going to compare notes and work together on pricing and decide that, okay, I'm not going to offer more than this, or, set prices both directions, both in procurement and sales, that collusion is a serious crime. Cooperatives have, and not only cooperatives, maybe marketing orders do as well, have that additional flexibility. They're able to talk about prices to a certain extent.
Well, that's really farmers in the United States. This is the beginning of cooperatives, is in that sector, is that farmers were kind of being pitted against one another by buyers. Yeah, we want peaches, but the farmer down the road is going to sell us peaches for cheaper. Will you lower your price for cheap peaches? So you have all these farmers that end up competing with one another. By forming a cooperative, they decide, okay, we are going to sell our peaches together for one price. And so the Capper-Volstead Act allows them to do that, but they're selling it through the cooperative. They're not selling it individually. They're selling it through the cooperative. And it's a really, really important statute. Cooperatives in agriculture have been extremely valuable to farmers. Otherwise, we would have just big corporations where farmers would be forced to sell all of their produce through to a corporation, and they would have lost a lot of power and a lot of financial gain. And so it's really, really advantageous to in the field of agriculture. And because of that, also we have all of these laws that enable and help them and support them to be able to do that.
Well, in fact, in agriculture, the livestock producers face already, there's 3 or 4 large processing companies, and 2 of them, one's in Brazil and one's in China, and they're and small operations, small farms, regional, just aren't getting served. And at least now I know it's a priority with the USDA to start promoting more of these kind of organizations. And I would imagine that there'll be some interest in, will a cooperative do it? Because there's still going to have to be somebody build a small local processing plant, to the packing sheds and so forth, that can get some funding, some, pretty significant funding from the U.S. Department of Agriculture right now. So there may be an opportunity there to be able to come in with those structures when these programs are getting priorities. So
yeah, I think that's what USDA sees, is that there are market failures, and these cooperatives can address those market failures. And indeed, it kind of goes this overlap to where obviously it's of help to farmers or ranchers in this instance, but it's a good thing for all of us. Do we want to be dependent on other countries for everything? No, we want small businesses in our country. We want to support that because it's of a mutual benefit, I would argue.
When you put together independent businessmen that are farmers and others, they're used to just that. They're used to being independent. And I would think part of it, you've got the law, you've got the need, you've got the money, you've gone to the table, you see where you want to be heading. But then I wonder how difficult it is to manage collectively and be able to hire somebody that maybe is the manager and let them in fact manage, because you run your own farm, you run your own processing plant, you run your own this and that, and you have to go to the table and find compromise or turn it over. It seems like there's an opportunity there to do some coaching or training.
Definitely. And, if you think about it, cooperatives are also big sources of employment, because what you were doing with the seed cooperative that you were working for, you were an employee, you weren't a member. So a lot of jobs are created by cooperatives, and a cooperative is a business. And so one of the things that we do when people are going to start a cooperative is we say, you need a business plan. You're going to need a business plan because you need to be able to project what kind of earnings you can have, how much it will cost to start up, how much it will cost to operate. And you're going to need that business plan to get funding, to get any kind of loan. And so just as you would start a cooperative, just as you would start any other kind of business, you also want to recognize the professional, that you need professional leadership, particularly in a larger cooperative. So you need to hire, farmers. What do? They run in a cooperative. The farmers sit on the board of directors. They create all of the policy. They create bylaws. They create operational procedures. But they hire somebody who's an expert in running it could be if it's marketing, an agricultural marketing business. They hire that person, and that person works for the cooperative. And so the members, and especially the board of directors that are elected by the members, they are monitoring and they're evaluating this manager, but they're respecting that they're the experts at running their farm, and whoever they hire is the expert at running the marketing or whatever whatever the focus of the cooperative business is.
Well, then I would imagine that this extends to all the other areas as well, everything from housing and labor and everything else, that spot that, again, you get the need identified, you get the willingness to be at the table, you get the legal structure, and one way or the other, you've got some seed dollars to get going, but then vesting the authority into somebody that has executive responsibilities in behalf, and that relationship, I would imagine, is a tricky area in all of the areas that it functions in.
Yeah, it's really interesting if you think about it. I mean, it's kind of a warm and fuzzy to me to think about the executive that you hire works with the people that are owning the business, working jointly with those direct consumers in order to generate a profit for everybody. So I think that's one of the things that brings me into this area, because it's really a wonderful way to do business. And you think it would be difficult, but it's actually not that difficult.
So when was the aha moment for you? I mean, at some point in time, you weren't in cooperatives, and did you get a glimmer in your eyes? And wait a minute, there's something here. This speaks to me. And then you've ended up several years in this path in the middle of trying to bring about cooperation in the way we're discussing. What was that point for you?
I think a lot of us start in an industry or a job, and we by a place that we're hired. And I was hired by the University of California to work in extension services in their Center for Cooperatives. And that was my start. And I really didn't know that much. In fact, I did a deep dive on cooperatives when I had an interview with them. And so I used, at that time when I started out in cooperatives, it was in childcare. And I knew a lot about childcare. And I learned a lot about cooperatives, and working with these childcare cooperatives. I saw this is such a rich field. It's such a good way to operate. At that time, I was really interested. I was young, was starting a family myself, wanted to be a good parent, and saw that, in cooperatives, you had this cooperation between the teachers that were being hired and the director that was running a childcare center and the parents. And who benefited most? Those kids in that program. And so whatever the focus of the cooperative is, that's what I think is really inspiring, is to see that we can work together and gain what we need. And we have the structures and so forth to do that. Is it always really easy? No. Of course, we have disagreements in life, in our marriages, in our families. You're going to have them in our business too. But the whole outcome is everybody is very vested. So those farmers, they're very, very vested in the outcomes. And so they get beyond those personal things and see, well, okay, we need to, what is best for the cooperative? And what is best for the cooperative also helps me as an individual.
Well, and then it's also what's best for the customers, or with, whatever these relationships up and down some of these supply chains and so forth. So it's very beneficial, which gets back to one of the original points that you were mentioning too. And that is, with an organization that's owned by, say, a large corporation and so forth, They want to squeeze as much profits as they can out of it and pay no more than they have to, not for the products they're putting into it, or not the employees, not the workers, and so forth, and maximize the profit. And in almost everywhere you look now, you see that profit maximization playing, which is just built in to squeeze workers. We hear about a lot, but certainly farmers, that they are getting like a nickel out of a dollar of what's marketed. And so that's pretty different right there, is to not that extreme kind of maximization, which I don't know if you get into professional services yet or not. But as I say that, I wonder about the medical system too, where you end up having these holding companies for hospitals and doctors and so forth that start prescribing, don't take more than 8 minutes with any patient, because you've got to get so many to check off the list. I'm wondering if some of those are going to be frontiers someday for cooperative.
It'd be nice.
I know. Well, listen, you have loads of opportunity in front of you. I think that we've gone through a period of time. We've been sourcing food from all over the world. We've been seeing corporations getting larger and larger. We're seeing crises like the housing crises that we're talking about. We're seeing farmers trying to get to a different size and not be dependent on just having a couple of large packing plants that they're dependent on. So, Kim, tremendous amount of opportunities. And if people want to help you find more opportunities, know more about cooperatives, about their programs, what can they find from your organization, and how can they find it?
Well, they can. We have a nice website and has all of our contact information on it, and we're available, and they can contact us. They can get resources on our website. I will say we always welcome donations, because that's how we operate as a nonprofit.
Well, you're encouraging me. I mean, it's reminding me that there's a future in cooperation, and what can get better than that? And lots of different ways to meet needs of society. And appreciate what you're doing, and thank you for explaining this today.
Thanks, Rodger.
You've been listening to Farm to Table Talk with your host, Rodger Wasson.